Do you find yourself masturbating frequently due to your high libido? And perhaps you even struggle with sexual arousal dysfunction, SAD, ED, when you're trying to be with your partner. So, you might be thinking that you want to get your testosterone levels checked to make sure everything is okay in this department. Well, I have news for you. Perhaps you have it backwards. So, let's explore. What is the role of testosterone in your sexual performance? What is healthy libido? And perhaps when you have a new view on this, your sex life can be better than ever. I'm Dr. Trish Leigh. Welcome back to another episode of Porn Brain Rewire, the podcast. So let's break these ideas down and let's connect some dots. The dots we're going to connect are actually from 3 recent research studies, and I think it's going to blow your mind. So stay with me until the end because, of course, I'm going to give you your brain hack strategy. So once you figure all of this out, you know exactly what to do to improve your sex life and your life overall. So let's think about the first idea is that you have a high libido. Let's explore this. So, what research shows is that what many men consider to be their high libido is actually hypersexuality. So, hypersexuality is identified by the World Health Organization as compulsive sexual behavior disorder. So essentially what that means is that you feel compelled, you have a compulsion to go back to sexual behaviors. And we know that a number one way that this manifests is by fantasy and thoughts and urges to go back to sexual behavior, which will be important as we keep considering these ideas. So you feel the urge to go back to sexual behavior so that you can feel good. That's compulsive sexual behavior. And when it gets to the level where it's impacting your life and especially your arousal function, then we know that that can reach disordered levels. And in this research study, they say, and I've been saying this for years, that, not everybody recognizes this at the level of a disorder because it does exist on a continuum. So there's people who have they feel like it's high libido, but it's actually hypersexuality. They have it at this level. Then there's people who have hypersexuality, compulsive sexual behavior disorder, at a much higher level, meaning that they know those behaviors are out of control. So if you don't feel like your behaviors are out of control, yet you keep going back to them, then you might fall in this category at a lower level. So let's keep thinking. High libido actually equates to hypersexuality, too much sexuality. Hypersexuality impacts you because you think about sex a lot. You feel compelled to masturbate. So, in the title of this episode, we have masturbation and high libido. So, what we know from the science is you feel compelled to go back to masturbate, but not necessarily compelled to have sex with your partner. Now, of course, if you have sexual arousal dysfunction in the mix too, it makes it more difficult to be with your partner. So, inherently, you go back to masturbation. So, have you ever wondered to yourself, why can you get aroused when it's time to masturbate, but you can't get aroused when it's time to be with your partner? Well, there's mechanisms at play, and testosterone is one of them. So, what I've talked about a lot is the role of dopamine, but I want to dive into the role of testosterone. So, what the studies show is that hypersexuality is linked to higher levels of testosterone. So, men who have higher levels of testosterone also have higher levels of hypersexuality. Now, of course, we always have to think about the chicken and the egg. That's why we have a few more studies to look at and to add to this equation. So, was there high testosterone first that led to high libido or hypersexuality? Or does hypersexuality lead to high testosterone? We'll dive in. But for right now, higher levels of testosterone equal hypersexuality. So what we know that equals is higher levels of sexual excitation. You get more excited about sex and think about sex more. Then there's also more difficulty in self-control when it comes to sexual behaviors. So it's difficult to not go towards those sexual behaviors once you have the idea that you're going to. At the same time, we know that there's high levels of sexual excitation and low levels of being able to control it, but there's higher levels of masturbation and lower levels of intercourse with a partner. So what's up with that? So, higher testosterone, hypersexuality, making it so that you want higher levels of stimulation. When you either consume pornography or explicit matter and you couple it with masturbation, that is higher level mental and physical stimulation, more so than when you have a connected, intimate, partnered sexual experience with an emotionally healthy partner. That's important because an emotionally healthy partner usually doesn't want to engage in sexual experiences that are at very high levels of dopamine for you. They want to have an experience. They're not necessarily concerned about a performance. The more hypersexuality you have, and remember, it's equated to higher testosterone, the more you're going to view sex as a performance to get you the most amount of pleasure. An emotionally healthy partner isn't going to be on board with that idea. They're going to want to connect with you for what's called the happiness trifecta, the perfect healthy amounts of dopamine for pleasure, serotonin for happiness and joy, and oxytocin for connection. So there might be a disconnect in your sexual relationship because of hypersexuality on your part and perhaps healthy libido on your partner's part. But I will tell you, if your partner knows about your hypersexuality and any sexual acting out behaviors like watching porn, masturbating frequently, anything online, any explicit matter, your partner's healthy libido may have tanked into hyposexuality. And now the gap between the two of your sexual libidos, or hypersexuality, hyposexuality, is really large. So we know that when you have higher testosterone, more hypersexuality doesn't necessarily lead you towards your partner, but it can lead you towards more masturbation. The authors of that study suggest, like I have been sharing with you based on lots of science, that the reason you go back to more masturbation and perhaps porn is for mood regulation, not for true sexual arousal. It's mood regulation. Your brain is calling for dopamine so that you can feel better, you can feel good. And after you've been caught in this loop for a while, it's so that you don't feel bad. That's the essence of addiction or compulsion. When compulsion moves even further and you know you can't stop these behaviors, then it means you're doing them to not feel bad, not just to feel good anymore. So for right now, let's remember that higher testosterone equals hypersexuality, which doesn't equal more intercourse with your partner, but it can lead you back for more masturbation to regulate your mood. Neuroimaging studies show that your brain can be hijacked by higher levels of testosterone, in that it affects the reward center in the midbrain and the reward pathways up to the frontal lobe. So, from these neuroimaging studies, we know that the way that your brain wants to chase down rewards can be impacted by higher levels of testosterone, which leads us to the second study that we're going to talk about today in terms of how does testosterone get higher. So, this study shows, and there's a few other ones that I know of at least, this study shows that when you are acting out in a sexually compulsive, hypersexual way, that this increases the testosterone that's flowing in your system. So remember, testosterone is a sex hormone and it can help you feel manly, it can help you feel aroused, it can help you feel strong. So, what this study showed, and it actually looked at men who were at a sex club, so it was not having to do with partnered sex with men who were thinking about or were about to engage in sex with their partner. These were men who were acting out in a hypersexual way. And what the study shows is that when the men were observing the behaviors in the sex club, that their testosterone increased by 11%. And when men were participating, testosterone levels increased 72%. So, what we know is when you're acting out in a hypersexual way, when it comes to explicit matter or any other acting out behavior, the testosterone levels in your brain increase. And so we know when this increase goes up, it has to do with hypersexuality. So, chicken or the egg? What we know right now is that for sure, at least, hypersexuality is the chicken that lays the egg of higher testosterone levels while you're acting out sexually in a hypersexual way and after you've acted out in a hypersexual way. So if you do it a lot, you're going to increase your testosterone levels. But of course, there's a caveat, there's a but that's coming from the next study. So you're increasing your testosterone levels during and after your masturbation sessions. Of course, if they're linked to fantasy or euphoric recall from porn influenced fantasy or thoughts, then we know that you're increasing your testosterone levels during these masturbation sessions. So you feel good from high levels of dopamine. You feel strong and engaged because of the higher levels of testosterone. But what the next study, number 3, shows us is that after this increase in testosterone, it leads to aggressive behaviors. So when we have these spikes of testosterone, it throws your mood off. Aggressive behaviors ensue. So you have a spike of testosterone, and you will have possibly a spike in aggressive behaviors, which could lead more to the compulsion to masturbate again. Because remember, from study number 1, the authors say the main reason people are going to masturbation and not sex with their partner is to regulate their mood. What we know from study number 2 is that engaging in sexual acting out in a hypersexual way spikes your testosterone. And now we know that this spike in testosterone leads to mood dysregulation. This is what's keeping you caught in the loop. What we also know, and of course, this part's particularly interesting to me, is that this spike in testosterone changes the brainwave patterns. So if you've listened to me for a while, my work surrounds the idea of EEG, electroencephalogram. What I do in my practice at drtrishleigh.com is I use technology and I can read how a person's brain is using electrical energy, brain speeds, I call them. So, this third study shows that this increase in testosterone then leads to an increase in the slow processing speeds and the extra fast processing speeds. Delta and theta on the slow end, that's going to give you the feeling of tired and overwhelmed, fatigued, exhausted. And high beta on the other end, which is the speed of high level excitation, hyper arousal, and also stress, anxiety, ramped up, overthinking, ruminating, OCD. So, this extra fast speed is the wired speed. This slow speed is the tired speed, and together they equal strained brain. That strained brain causes mood dysregulations. So we know the spike in testosterone shows that then it changes the brainwave performance. And again, if you keep going back for more masturbation, you think you have a high libido, but you're actually caught in a hypersexual loop. It's actually an addictive 4D dopamine cycle that is being spiked by testosterone by many people in a compulsive hypersexual manner. So, one caveat here is I know right now you're thinking that I'm saying that high testosterone is bad. I will get to that in 1 second. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is too high of testosterone that is constantly being spiked by sexual acting out in a hypersexual way may make you think you have a high libido, but you actually have compulsive sexual behavior disorder, which is problematic and it leads to a lot of problems in your life, namely sexual arousal dysfunction from strained brain, that perhaps high testosterone is not what you're looking for. Perhaps too high of testosterone has been the problem all along. Because what happens after you get these spikes of testosterone, just like we see with dopamine, then it tanks. And what the studies show is that ultimately you end up with lower levels of sex hormones in your brain and your system, and it leads to problems with testosterone and it leads to problems with Semen also. So a lot of people are into semen retention. If you're into semen retention, there's some merit to that. And I don't know that I would want you to not have sex at all, because retaining semen completely isn't how the body was developed, but not overstimulating the system and masturbating and ejaculating a lot could definitely do you some good in terms of balancing testosterone levels and dopamine levels and bringing your brain out of the hypersexual mode back into the healthy sexual mode, back to healthy libido. So, what the study shows is that then your semen quality in terms of amount of sperm and motility decrease. So, this spiking of testosterone is not healthy for you. We also know from other studies that people with low levels of testosterone can get healthy erections with a partner. We know from studies that people who are caught in a hypersexual mode can get erections while they're masturbating or watching porn or by themselves, but then they struggle to get erections with their partner, sexual arousal dysfunction. So, my point about that is that high levels of testosterone are not necessary for healthy erections with a partner. We know this scientifically. So perhaps you've been thinking about it backwards, that you need high levels of testosterone, where actually you're spiking your testosterone in the moments of acting out, which lead you to lower levels of testosterone overall in the deficit state back in your life. So if you go get your testosterone levels tested, they would test low, but you would have to test them while you are masturbating and fantasizing to see that spike. So, what does this mean? It means that balancing testosterone levels, you don't need testosterone replacement. You need to stop spiking and divoting those testosterone levels, and your sex life will improve. So that leads us to our question: what does healthy libido look like? Healthy libido is that you're able to enjoy a sexual experience with your partner when it's time to be sexual. So, that time to be sexual is when your five kids are not home, which, by the way, is never. It's time to be sexual when you have time to connect with a partner. And it's not just about pleasure at high levels for your brain to get the rush of dopamine and the spike of testosterone. It's about being able to connect physically, mentally, and on a spiritual level. We know that it's orgasms have been called la petite mort, the little death. And the little death is the little death of that, inauthentic Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde self that you can accomplish, you can achieve and have and enjoy in the experience of being with your partner. But you can't do that if you're spiking all the levels of your neurotransmitters and your hormones in your body. So, what healthy libido looks like is when it's time to be sexual with your partner, you can do it and have a beautiful experience. You're not necessarily worried about the performance aspect because you're too busy getting it on and being with your partner and enjoying it. What healthy libido doesn't look like is that it's time for you to work and all you can think about is masturbating or watching porn. That's not healthy libido. That is not high libido. That's what I want you to know from this. That's hypersexuality. When it's time for you to work and all you think about is sex, hypersexuality. When it's Christmas or it's a family party and it's time to enjoy and engage and be with your people. That is time to enjoy your life. And if you're thinking about masturbating and getting away to watch porn, that is hypersexuality. So, hypersexuality, high libido, not the same thing. High libido is wanting to be with your partner and in a really healthy way. So, when you change your framework on this and you leave porn behind, you leave masturbation behind. Yes, I said that. When you leave masturbation behind, what happens is you're no longer using sex to regulate your mood. And it actually becomes about being with your partner and having a good time. That's healthy libido. So when you leave masturbation behind, you can have that. If you don't leave porn, explicit matter, and masturbation behind, the idea is it will be really difficult for you to do that. Now, when we talk about sexual arousal dysfunction, If you keep spiking dopamine and testosterone in this way, in this loop, then it'll be very difficult for them to become balanced for you to be able to have healthy sexual arousal with your partner. Remember, sexual excitation is higher in hypersexuality because of higher testosterone, and the ability to control yourself, self control, is lower. So we want self control to go up when it comes time to masturbate, and we want sexual excitation to decrease to healthy levels linked to your partner. That's how your sex life improves. That's how sexual arousal dysfunction improves, by balancing neurotransmitters and hormones. I can see this in people's brains. So when people come to me, the first thing that I do is called a QEEG brain map. I can evaluate how a person's brain is using electrical energy. And you know what I see 9 out of 10 times? Too much delta and theta, too much high beta. You know what I see the other times? They've tanked completely into something that I call drained brain, which has too much alpha in the middle, very high artificial neutral, which is also substantiated by that research study that shows that when a brain is in too much delta and theta and high beta, wired and tired, it has low alpha. But if you keep going back to porn and masturbation, they go low, drain brain spikes, and sexual arousal dysfunction locks in a neurorigid manner. I can see that in the QEG brain map. So if you struggle with any of this, I want you to know, and this comes from my heart with no judgment, you probably fall into the category of hypersexuality. I know men want to think of themselves with high libido because that makes them feel manly. But hypersexuality isn't manly. It's a problem and it's affecting you. It'll affect your mental health, your physical health, and your sex life, which definitely impacts your partner's mental and physical health. That's why I'm here. I'm on a mission to help you understand this so you can reconnect with your honey and literally ride off into the sunset with a better sex life and a better life than you maybe have ever found before, because we know most people find porn, explicit matter, and masturbation when they're young, which again is substantiated by study number 3, that the earlier that you're impacted by this, the more it impacts your brain. Okay, so for your brain hack strategy for the day is get your journal out, get your pleather journal out, get your pen out, and I want you to consider the idea of hypersexuality versus high libido. And I know you probably like the idea of high libido, and I know you probably don't like the idea of hypersexuality, but I want you to think about them in relation to what I've talked about here. Does sex, porn, masturbation pop into your mind a lot? And does it have to do with your partner or not necessarily? Think about hypersexuality and see if you fall into that category. Because if you fall into that category, what you hear online about testosterone, what you hear online about masturbation being good for you, it doesn't apply when hypersexuality is in the mix. It's different. And that's the problem with listening to people who don't know about hypersexuality, which is the majority of professionals. The majority of professionals will tell you masturbation's fine and it can contribute to your healthy sex life. And masturbation's good for you and it's helping to increase your testosterone. But that's not the case in hypersexuality, which is impacting millions and millions and millions of men across the world and more women. So most people fall into the category of hypersexuality, and that might be you. So when you consider that, then your brain hack is to, this is part of your brain hack, hypersexuality versus high libido. But then I want you to think about the role of masturbation, the role of fantasy and thoughts, and the role of sexual arousal dysfunction impacting your ability to be with your partner. Because it's easier to go, I'm going to go for testosterone replacement, and that's going to solve all my problems. That's easier. It's like, give me a pill and I'll take care of this thing. But unfortunately, this thing isn't taken care of by a pill. It's taken care of by increasing your emotional intelligence, which means number one, you increase your self awareness. That's why I really want you to come to terms with hypersexuality if it's impacting you. Hypersexuality, high libido. You don't fall into high libido, you fall into hypersexuality. That changes everything. Once you have self-awareness, what it does is now it increases your ability to self-regulate. What that means is you exercise more control over going towards that high sexual excitation from masturbation. You go, no, I'm not going there because I'm going to balance my testosterone levels. I'm going to balance my dopamine levels. That's self regulation. It also allows you to have more social awareness. So if you're in a coupleship, a marriage, boyfriend, girlfriend, please look at your partner and see how she or he is impacted by this situation. It's impacting her. I want you to know that. So when you gain more social awareness that this is bigger than high libido and testosterone, that it's actually hypersexuality and it's rippling out from you, now you can have more social awareness of the impact on your partner, which allows you to engage in more social relationship management, which means you get back to building intimacy in your relationship. You might tell your partner about your struggles. I usually encourage people to tell their partners once they've gained some success. So if you're looking for success, please go over to drtrishleigh.com. Porn Free Brain Forever will help you come out of any sexual acting out behavior. It's a digital program. It's affordable, accessible, and anonymous, just like porn. So if you need help, get the help that you need because a testosterone replacement isn't going to do it, but you can do it. You totally can do it with the right tools, techniques, strategies, and support like me. That's why I'm here because I want to help you. In that program, I run a monthly meeting so that I can help you break this down further and get over the hurdle that's keeping you from the amazing sex life that you want and you deserve. And so does your honey. So go over to drtrishleigh.com. And I really hope that this episode has helped you. And until next time, control your brain or it'll control you.